So, hello, everybody. We welcome you to our Tech Talk today. We are pleased that you have so many interested participants today. I would like to give you a short overview of our today's Tech Talk. First of all, our CEO Hans-Peter Himmel will open the event before we hand it over to Boris with his presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can use the bottom question and answers at the bottom of the screen, and Boris will answer your questions afterwards. We will record the session. Afterwards, you can view the recording and the presentation on our website. If you have further questions after the Tech Talk, you can contact Boris directly. Herefore, he will publish his contact details. Now I will hand over to Hans-Peter Himmel. Enjoy our Tech Talk.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the start of our Tech Talk today. I have known Boris for over 10 years. It's been around 5 years since he told me about his product, the ERM4SN. And I was immediately aware of the potential of the product ERM4SN, and I'm thrilled with how effectively it supports our customers every day. So Boris and me, we decided to make the ERM4SN product available to as many ServiceNow users as possible. So Bossard & Partner became responsible for the sale of the product in the DACH region. At the same time, Bossard & Partner supports customers with the introduction, maintenance, especially when changing releases, and the further development of their ServiceNow installations. It is very helpful that the consultants from Bossard & Partner can use the product ERM4SN as a basis for their work. This allows the consultants to organize their work more efficiently and effectively, and always leads to qualitatively better results. I am therefore very pleased that Boris is the referent in today's Tech Talk and will present some of the many functionalities and possibilities of ERM4SN. Dear Boris, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Hans-Peter. So welcome to this Tech Talk about instance drift. We have we split this talk literally in two parts. This is part one, where we mainly focus on the data drift, where in the next session, which is going to be next week, we focus more on schema itself, schema drift. So what is, first of all, I introduce myself. So my name is Boris Moers. I'm the CEO and founder of ERM4SN. As Hans-Peter mentioned, ERM4SN stands for Entity Relationship Model for ServiceNow, which the intent is that you can connect the product to your ServiceNow instances, and it will go and help you to understand the table dependencies, the schema model, the data, the relationship in your ServiceNow instance. So we run this since quite some time now, and we have some customers using this product since a while, and we are extending and adding features over time. And today I'd like to introduce you an additional feature, which comes on top of ERM4SN when it comes to data drift in ServiceNow. So what is instance drift? So we call this instance drift. This is, some people call it configuration drift. In general, it is when your ServiceNow instance is, let's say, I always make this comparison it's like a whiskey. It's a blend of multiple liquids. So in other terms, when you have a base instance of ServiceNow and you start working on it, and then you upgrade your instance, you have some of the changes which are not upgraded. They're still the same old version. And if you do this over time, you have a blend of multiple ServiceNow versions. So you're not running on Tokyo, you're running on, yeah, difficult to say. So what are you running on then? So what is causing this drift? In general, every time you touch an out-of-the-box component in ServiceNow, then it can cause conflicts with further updates. So when you touch a business rule, when you touch a table, when you touch a field, you name it, right? In general, we can split this up in two sections. So we have data changes and we have dictionary changes. Data changes are something like, as I said, business rules, script includes, etc., UI components. And every time you just open a business rule and then you save it, that you maybe have not changed anything, this can cause a conflict later. And you deactivate the record. Let's say you deactivate the business rule, replace it with something else, or whatever you do, it will. ServiceNow is treating this as a modification and will not automatically upgrade this. On the other hand, which is also a change, if you touch dictionary, so you change the default value of a field, you change the length of a field, you change if a field is the attribute, if it's mandatory, etc. In that moment, it's seen as touched. So what are the risks if you have such a blend instance? And in general, if the instance works fine at the moment, people might think, well, I have a good ServiceNow environment, all the processes work, but there are various levels of risks here. So the instance might work at the moment, might look okay, but over time, it might start to become expensive. So if you have a lot of modifications, then when you upgrade the instance, you will see those conflicts in the skipped changes in the upgrade log, and they all need to be addressed. Some companies have thousands of skip changes, and if they have not been addressed from day one, then they will remain forever. So that means every record which is not, every skipped record which is not managed will remain on the old value. This leads into higher maintenance cost. So depending on the way things are implemented in ServiceNow, you have higher maintenance costs because you have to maintain the modified elements as well. So you have to track if there's an update on that element, and you have to literally move the updates into your scripts, etc., which you have modified. And then there is the risk that you're missing future features. You can't install that, or you think you have installed Tokyo, but some of the features are not enabled, not available, because there's still the old one. And then if it's very bad, you might have version lock-in, so you can't move away or move on. And some companies then have to re-implement everything on a fresh vanilla instance, which is very expensive. So that's why it's very important that one takes this serious and looks at instance drift from day one. So what actions can be taken? First of all, we're looking for drift indicators. right? So where do I see how far my drift is? Then I'd like to know what my drift is. So I want to analyze this. And I need to do something against it, right? So drift indicators are upgrade logs, as I said, but we have sometimes, sometimes lots of, can be the case that you have lots of false positives. So if someone is just touching a record, but literally if you open that record, the skipped update in the log, you will see there is no change. It looks identical, but ServiceNow somehow has not upgraded that record because it's easily touched. Then ServiceNow offers an instance scan, which is self-service. So one can run a scan against the platform, gives you a report, you see which top user have lots of modification. And then there's the option of a health scan. This is something which is on demand, which requires a third-party instance, which literally connects to your instance, and you get a report in a PDF format, which is much more detailed than just schema or data drift. That can also be a source. And then, of course, one can look at the error logs. So, and a mismatch of code versions will cause errors in the error log. Now, to analyze this more detailed fashion, there are literally two options here. One option is if you only want to know what has changed on the schema level, then ERM for SN is the tool of choice. It's very simple here to compare various ServiceNow instances on the schema level. You see which fields are different, what attributes of the fields have been changed, who has introduced a new field, etc. On the other hand, if you want to have it more detailed, then a code drift assessment is required. And this can also be done against an out-of-the-box vanilla version of ServiceNow. And then one sees exactly which line in which file has been modified. So once that's done, then actions need to be taken to fix this and to ensure that in the future, drift happens not that quickly again. And maybe, it can be difficult to decide if a certain change is required, if this should be done on top of ServiceNow, or if it would not be easier to change something which is out of the box. And most of the time, it is much more difficult or complex to do this on top instead of just go and change something which is there out of the box. And this needs to be, decided case by case. But it needs clear guidelines how to deal with this. Maybe also architect board, which talks then about or decides about which way to go. And if you use ERM for SN, you can also simplify this process because it helps you also to draw diagrams. So this is very useful to understand an out-of-the-box application structure, for example, which tables belong to the application, how are they related, what fields do they have, etc., which can also be a good baseline for discussion and then later for documentation. And then as a fourth point here on the slide, this is my favorite one actually, because it is quite common to do this in classic software projects, is to use a CI/CD pipeline. What is CI/CD? The thing here is it's quite, as I said, it's in other projects, software projects, this is common. What you do is you literally test your code and validate the changes which are done in the code automatically, whenever possible. So for example, code is maintained in a Git repository. When there is a request to in searches of deploying this to another instance, there will be a request of it's called pull request against another branch in Git itself, and there we can automate this. So we can. So this is by the way also supported by ServiceNow. So one can trigger an instance scan and then just pull down the results, or do test execution on the dev or on the test instance. And then you can also do a peer code review. And then if all those quality gates are passed, only then one deploys. And this also helps to keep the quality of the instance in a good shape. It's very important because today still many ServiceNow customers use update sets. And if you just ship an update set, it literally can contain anything. And so then also, if there is a skipped update on the target instance, you kind of support this blend of your application. So you not only have a blend of versions, you also have a blend of your application code, because if record in an update set is skipped, then your production is not like the dev environments are. So let's have a look at what ERM for SN can do and how this works. So in general, ERM for SN runs outside of ServiceNow. It's a Java application. We host it. You could also host it yourself. And what it does is it connects to the ServiceNow instance and just pulls all the schema information to a local database. So this can be used to document your existing ServiceNow instances, but also to do an instance schema drift comparison with a vanilla instance. So we can connect to your production instance and then use a ServiceNow vanilla instance with the same baseline version as your production version, and then we make sure that all the applications and plugins are enabled, and then we just load all the schema data into ERM for SN and can show discrepancies between the two versions, right? So one can create reports or diagrams based on this. And what's also important, when there is a schema change detected, that it needs to be analyzed, what impact it has. Mainly, schema changes mainly have an impact on APIs. So if you have a third-party integration with your instance, or third-party integration, import sets is also something which needs to be looked at. Or, and that's a point which I very like, is reports. We had the case in the past where a customer ran a report and then based on some tables in ServiceNow, and then ServiceNow changed the relationship between those two tables. There was a third table introduced. No one literally knew that. And then the report suddenly, the result of the report changed, because it had old data in those tables. The new data did not match because the table in between was not known, and suddenly the report showed the wrong data. So this is something which is very important in my eyes here. So now I just quickly want to show you how this looks like in ERM for SN. So if you log into the demo instance here, this is public. You can do the same thing as well. Here on the analyze, it allows us to compare various versions. So we can have, here we are on San Diego, and here we are on Tokyo. This one could also be Tokyo and Tokyo, or San Diego and San Diego. And we can quickly compare what has changed here on the table and column level between those two instances. Sorry for the color change. So here we see what fields are missing in Tokyo, or what columns have changed. Here the type was is a float, or you name it. So this is one report which shows you on one page what all changes are have been implemented by ServiceNow between those two versions. So this is very handy if one wants to have a quick overview what was changed. So I'm not logged in anymore, that's fine. Also color change. So if you go here, you log in, you can download this example here if you're interested, but literally as this is demo data, it will not represent your ServiceNow instance. I will in the meeting next week, in the presentation I give next week, I will show you more detailed features of ERM for SN. I want to keep this meeting here, this presentation, about code drift, because I think it's very important to talk about this topic too. So if you want to know more about ERM for SN, what it can do, please join us in the next call. Also, if you have some time later in the call, we can maybe discuss open questions as well. So let's move on to code drift. So as said, we had this discussion with a ServiceNow customer. Literally, he wanted to know how good the quality is of the changes which have been implemented by the team of the service provider, which is working on for them on their instance. And we also talked about ERM for SN, because you can, as I showed you, can do all of these things on the schema level. But schema is only one side of it. The code itself, the other side. And you could also say, well, the schema is also code, so it would also be available in the if you literally look at the code. But on that side, it's difficult to understand how a database schema is if you just look at, let's say, a table definition. So, but when you look at a JavaScript code, for example, or an HTML snippet of a UI form and so on, there it makes absolutely sense to look at the data itself. So what we're doing here is we have a code engine which connects to your ServiceNow instance, similar as ERM for SN does, and it pulls all the information from the instance to the local file system, depending on what is required to be analyzed. So it could be just for a specific application, or it could be for certain records which have been created or modified by specific users, etc. So the filter can be configured. And then it allows to do a line-based diff analysis. So we see then in details what line in what file has been modified between two versions. So this is very handy to also get an idea of what is the code quality. So when people literally write script includes, etc., how good is that, right? So this code drift assessment is done based on this code engine. But what we also can offer is then on top of that to review all these guidelines which the team is working on, because that was the other topic what we discussed. So are the best practices, are they in place? Are they following those standards? How do they document? How do they design? etc. And also if they test it all, that's all another point. Some companies test too much, then it becomes very difficult to maintain the tests themselves. Some don't test at all, which is a little kind of risky in my eyes. So this needs a good balance. So how many tests do I create? Do I use create them in ATF? Where do I execute those tests, etc.? So how does such a code drift assessment look like? So what we do is, as I said, we connect to the instance and download the files which belong, let's say, to an application. And in ServiceNow, if you look at an update set, everything is in XML format. And it doesn't make sense to analyze an XML file. So what we're doing here is we turn those records into script components. So we turn it into a human readable format, or if a developer would work locally, in that case, he would create, in this case, JavaScript files or so, and not XML files. No one creates them. And what you also see in the screenshot on the left-hand side, the business rule here. So all the business rules will show up in this table, and we have a subfolder, which is the table name, and then we have another subfolder which explains if the business rule is active or not. And then we specify, we have additional structure, which has when the business rule runs, what order it has, and what's the name of the business rule, what the condition is, can also be turned into JavaScript, and then what the script itself is. And now with that format, we have a source to compare the various instances. So if it's just XML, it's very difficult because XML is noisy, and most of the time the component which is relevant is then maybe in one line, or it's encoded, so it's a valid XML. And here it is just scripts, right? So we convert those artifacts from ServiceNow into whatever version file what we can do. So we for sure everything is JavaScript, so we create JavaScript for business rules, etc. Then UI pages we might turn into multiple components. So there's a script component, there's a server-side script component, there's a CSS component, an HTML component, so you have multiple files. But and then there might be some files which don't make sense to convert because they might not contain script, and we keep them in a JSON format because that is also easier to read. And we sort the attributes in the JSON file by name. So that means in ServiceNow it's also sometimes random which field comes first. That means when we do the next step, when we do this line comparison, we have always the right line at the right point. So now, once that's done, we get something like this. And ServiceNow internally, sometimes when you compare two versions of a file, you have a similar view. This here is what you get if you look at the diff from a Git perspective. So what we do is we put all the code in a Git repository, and we literally create two commits, one commit with your code and one commit with the vanilla code. And then we can run a line-by-line comparison and generate a report, like here in the screenshot, which shows exactly what field has been what line has been modified, what file has been renamed, what file has been deleted, etc. So one gets a very detailed analysis of the quality of the instance, the quality of the code, what people have changed, how they did it, if they have changed something which is out of the box or not, if they add records to the instance, then it might not be relevant at all. And this then also can be configured when we export. So we can, as I said in the beginning, we can specify, do we want to see the whole application? Do we only want to see what they have changed, etc.? So this is very handy to get a detailed view here. So this code drift assessment is a service which we provide with Bossard & Partner, because we can do more than just, as I said, this code analysis. So we can also check what is the general status of the platform itself. We have specialists here which can also support us here. We can look up the docs, literally how people should work. We can look at the instance itself. So we can do an end-to-end analysis on top of what ServiceNow provides you with instance or health scan. If you want to know more, you can reach out to Hans-Peter or one of the two sales, Ralf and Udo. If you have specific questions about the presentation or the code drift tool itself, you also can reach out to me. So what are the takeaways? To reduce drift, we need to have aligned and literally lived guidelines. It's very important. So everything, all the work which is done on ServiceNow should be done in the same fashion. And that's literally very important. And it also needs to be done for that all the time and not just at the beginning. Then ERM4SN helps you, of course, to visualize the schema changes. Then you should literally, please go log on to one of your instances and look at the upgrade logs and skip up. Please just do that. And just count the numbers which you have, have not been addressed. And I fear you will be surprised how many skip changes there are. So it's very important to have an eye on this. If you want to know it in a detailed fashion, we can do a code drift assessment. And then to protect from having this problem again in the future, install quality gates. It's very important. So have a CI/CD pipeline, use Git if possible, automate wherever it's possible, because no one wants to do a code review. And that's, by the way, that's another problem with ServiceNow. If you want to do code review, even in Git, everything is XML. And it can be very painful if you have to do that on an XML basis. But it needs to be done, right? And unfortunately, ServiceNow is not supporting this out of the box. But in the moment we can turn the application files into human readable files, we can even support that code review is much easier, because then people look at code and then they don't look at XML files. And then, of course, only deploy when all the gates pass. And if they don't pass, don't deploy it. That's very important. So, and as said, we have another webinar next week where I will talk about code drift again, or schema instance drift, sorry. But I will more focus on the schema itself. So what can ERM4SN do? How can you compare multiple ServiceNow instances? What are the options? So we can compare over time, we can compare over versions. Then The history part is also very, very interesting here, because when a column is changing, that's also something which is captured. And how you can easily create UML diagrams. So that's the topic for next week. I said this week is code drift. So that's it so far. Do we have questions?
Thank you, Boris, for this interesting presentation. Let me check. I have one question here. Is this code drift analyze part of ERM for SN?
No, it's two different things. So as said, the ERM for SN is the standalone application which connects to your instances, and code drift is something which most likely will not be a standalone product at some point, because it requires the needs of the customer. So we do this case by case. When depends on what the ServiceNow customer wants to know, we design the filter and then create this comparison. Yeah, two different things.
And what about the cost for such an analysis?
Oh, yeah. What does it cost? Yeah, it depends. It depends on how much, how many applications require to be compared or looked at. And I would also say this is case by case. So if someone wants to also maybe let us review the best practices, then that costs a little bit more.
Okay, I think we have to speak about another time again. I have another question here. This is like, do I get an overview of my drift over time?
Yes, you can do that. Absolutely. So the as I said, we capture the code in with Git. So we put it in the Git repository. And that's by nature of Git. We can then compare the first commit with the latest one, and then you will see over time what has been changed, right? And what we also can do is we can create a report every time we compare. This can be reproduced at any point in time, so we can compare. The first analysis is your baseline with what you have. Then let's say your team is working on reducing the drift, and then we can compare this again. Baseline, reduced drift, you get a new report. So yes, absolutely, this can be done over time. Yeah.
Okay, so there is another question. How do I measure the overall criticality of drift, like terms of cost or impact, not just in number of divisions?
Well, how do I measure them? I'm not sure if I got that right. So, I mean, sorry, not sure about the question. So I know it sounds very technical. So when we look at lines, etc., and compare that, and it's maybe difficult to know what is a good drift or what is an acceptable drift and what not, right? In general, I would say what you get is a feedback or a gut feeling how good the quality or in general the work is when the teams work on that ServiceNow instance, which is, I would also say, most of the time when you look at ServiceNow, it's just a black box. You don't know what's all there, right? So there are sometimes tons of error logs, which you don't know why they're there. Everyone is working on the required features in sprints, etc., and they try to be in time. Of course, sometimes there is, oh, when is enough time available? So there's always this point of time pressure, and you literally, if it works, right? So, but what is the quality about that, and what is the impact in the future? And I think that to have this feedback and to know where you stand, what the quality of your team is, then this might also help you sleep better. I think it doesn't make sense to compare this with maybe what could be if you have no drift at all, or how much do other companies drift. At the end, I think it is what counts for yourself, and you to know if you have feedback, how good your team is, or how good the service provider is. I think that helps much more. I'm not sure. I think I missed that question, but if there is a clarification required, please reach out to me. Happy to talk about that.
Thank you, Boris. Yeah, I think it's often like people have questions later on. As Boris said already, you can contact him directly for technical topics, as well as Bossert and Partner about the product and distribution. Yeah, so I would like to thank you for joining us. A special thanks to Boris for your presentation. Thank you very much for your time. And then I wish you a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.